Hi and welcome to The Bearded Historian, a channel about animated history and historical research in general. I hope you enjoy what you're going to see and would very much appreciate your feedback in the comment section or elsewhere. Today's topic will take us to the 1st century AD and the fringes of the Roman Empire in the very north of Europe. But before we even get started, I want to put one thing out there. As you may notice once you've watched the video, the format is heavily inspired by great channels such as Extra Credit and Crash Course World History. In case you're unfamiliar with the work these guys are doing, I would highly encourage you to go check out their channels. It's definitely worth your time if you're interested in the general topic or theme here of historical research and condensed videos that present very interesting information. But enough of that for now, let's get right to why we're here today. I want to talk about a question that is arguably as interesting as it is debated in modern historical research. Did the Roman Empire ever invade Ireland? And yes, the name Ireland is of course anachronistic in this context, but in an effort to make it easier for all of us, I will be trying to refer to geographical locations in this video by only ever using their modern names to avoid any confusion with the various names that were out there at the time. And I also want to be giving you a very quick spoiler alert before we even get started. We are looking at a question here that modern historical research hasn't been able to answer with a clear yes or no. I hope this hasn't turned you off the video now, because there's still some really interesting conclusions to be found, and I hope that by the end of the video we'll have a better understanding of what could have possibly happened in Ireland at the time. So why ask this question at all, and how do we know about any of this to begin with? In order to answer those questions, I would like to start by looking at the source material we have available that gives us an indication and an idea of what has happened at the time. In the late 1st century AD, we have two written sources giving us the briefest hints about what may have happened in Ireland just about 20 years earlier, at a time where the Roman Emperor Titus had barely just come to the throne and the empire's province of Britannia, Ireland's direct neighbor, was in the firm grip of Titus's loyal governor, the famous general Julius Agricola. Now this very Agricola so happens to be the father-in-law to the author behind one of our two sources, the well-known historian and senator of the time Publius Cornelius Tacitus. This is an interesting fact to bear in mind, as you can surely imagine there was at least a certain degree of bias when Tacitus was writing about his own family effectively capturing part of their legacy. But still, his work on the life and character of Julius Agricola is widely considered to be the primary and most reliable source on the events in Britain and Ireland at the time. After all, Tacitus was able to talk to Agricola about these events in person, giving him the opportunity to get a detailed insight far beyond what any study of written reports would have allowed him to compile otherwise. Our second writer, then, is the Roman poet and author of the so-called satires, Decimus Junius Juvenalis, better known as Juvenal. His works remain mostly irrelevant for our question, but one sentence, and it's really just one sentence, has repeatedly been picked up by modern-day historians when looking at this very topic. And while we are at it, it's important to call out here that there is a possibility that Juvenal had served as a soldier in Roman Britain at some point earlier in his life, but more on that later. Last but not least, there's of course an important non-written source to consider, a selection of archaeological evidence that was found in and around Ireland. And we will see that, if nothing else, archaeology will allow us to get a good insight into the various connections that existed between the Roman province of Britannia and Ireland at the time. Maritime trade and exchange was most certainly one of them. So just to recap real quick, We are equipped with three primary sources here, two of them written in nature, and that would be Juvenal's work and Tacitus' work, and then lastly, all the archaeological evidence that we have for the time in question. And using those, we will be able to get a closer look at what's been going on in Ireland in the late 1st century AD. But where does this leave us exactly? Let's look at the events that unfolded around the year 80 AD in Britannia as described by Tacitus. The Roman governor Agricola had just spent the last 3 years successfully reinforcing Roman dominance over the province by subduing rebellious tribes in Wales and leading punitive expeditions against those who had dared to stand up against Rome. But his handiwork was far from over at that point. Next, Agricola's gaze wandered north, aiming at expanding Roman's rule into territory previously left untouched by the empire. And so in the summer of 79 AD, his legions marched into Caledonia, today's Scotland. He was met with preciously little resistance at first, and successfully continued to push northward during the campaigning seasons of the following years. While describing those events in Agricola's biography, Tacitus makes a remark that is crucial to our question. In fact, it is the context of this very statement that started the modern debate around the possibility of a Roman incursion into Ireland. Talking about the year 81 AD, he wrote, "In the 5th year of the war, Agricola himself crossed in the leading ship and subdued in a series of victories tribes hitherto unknown." Taken by itself, this sentence doesn't give much reason for argument. After all, it makes sense that Tacitus would just continue his descriptions of Agricola's northbound campaign into Scotland. However, what made this special is what was said next. Tacitus followed up with a paragraph exclusively dealing with Ireland, and so a number of historians argued that the before-mentioned naval crossing had to be in reference to Ireland also. After all, Rome knew preciously little about the Celtic tribes of Ireland, and so the mention of tribes hitherto unknown would be a perfect match. So let's take a look at what Tacitus actually said following that statement. In that part of Britain which looks towards Ireland, he posted some troops, hoping for fresh conquests rather than fearing attack, inasmuch as Ireland, being between Britain and Spain, and conveniently situated for the seas round Gaul, might have been the means of connecting with great mutual benefit the most powerful parts of the empire. Its extent is small when compared with Britain, but exceeds the islands of our seas. In soil and climate, in the disposition, temper, and habits of its population, it differs but little from Britain. We know most of its harbors and approaches, and that through the intercourse of commerce. One of the petty kings of the nation, driven out by internal faction, had been received by Agricola, who detained him under the semblance of friendship till he could make use of him. I have often heard him say that a single legion with a few auxiliaries could conquer and occupy Ireland, and that it would have a salutary effect on Britain for the Roman arms to be seen everywhere, and for freedom, so to speak, to be banished from its sight. There is a lot to be taken in here, and for the purpose of our video we'll summarize it in two main categories. First, Agricola's reasons for a possible incursion into Ireland, and secondly, the means or the resources he had available for such an endeavor. On the one side, Agricola knew or believed that a foothold in Ireland would make for a good connection between the empire's regions in Britannia and Spain. This was primarily driven by a skewed understanding of geography and the idea that Ireland lay between the two provinces, making it a worthwhile conquest for logistical reasons alone. Furthermore, subduing the tribes of Ireland would also put a stop to any coastal raiding in Britain and secure naval trade. And lastly, Agricola felt any successful campaign into Ireland to be relatively low effort with potential wide-reaching impacts on Britain, as it would remove any rebellious influences from the region and have a controlling effect on the local tribes he had to struggle with and fight with in Wales and elsewhere for so long. But how would he achieve that? Well, his campaigns in the north hadn't encountered much resistance yet, and he had troops available to spare in an effort to secure the coastline facing Ireland. So why not use these troops for more than simple guard duty? In his estimation, it wouldn't need much more than a single legion and a few auxiliaries to conquer Ireland, promising a high return on investment for any expedition, both in plunder and prestige alike. But the potential fame to be gained with his troops and Rome in general cannot be disregarded as a key motivator here as well. This whole idea was of course largely ill-conceived, and with our modern knowledge of the actual geography of Ireland, we know that many more troops would have most likely been needed. But at the time, Agricola may have very well thought this possible. Which leads us to the last reason. In the Roman tradition of looking to fight just wars with the divine favor on Rome's side, Agricola also seemed to have invited an ousted Irish nobleman to his court. This would have allowed him to venture into Ireland under the pretense of wanting to restore a friend's rightful position among his people, a strategy that Rome had used time and time again with the aim of installing client rulers that over time would be integrated into the empire itself. Some historians even ventured as far as to claim that we know who this Irish nobleman was exactly. Now, I won't even try to pronounce his name, I'll just put it on the screen there for you. But suffice it to say that the reliability of the source material for this claim is somewhat questionable and will not be discussed here. But if you want to find out more about this theory, please feel free to explore the material I have linked in the descriptions below. So with that, we know that Agricola both had the reasons and resources to consider a military expedition into Ireland. But rather than giving more information on any such incursion, Tacitus soon after continues to describe Agricola's campaign in Scotland and doesn't spend any more ink on writing anything about Ireland. So we are instead left to wonder whether any expedition actually took place after all, and why it may have been so short-lived that Agricola soon returned to his ambitious plans in Scotland. So let's look at our other sources to see if they can shed any more light on these questions than what Tacitus allows us to. Do you still remember Juvenal, the soldier turned poet who might have served some of his military career in Britain? I did promise that we'd look at him again, and this is it. He has written just one sentence that historians have picked up time and time again when looking at this question. And the sentence itself goes, "Our arms, indeed, we have pushed beyond Ireland's shores, to the newly conquered Orkneys and the short-nighted Britons." Taken by itself, this would easily be overlooked in the context of Juvenal's remaining, mostly satirical work. But knowing what we do from Tacitus, historians have referenced this remark as further evidence of an actual military involvement in Ireland. Much of the credibility of this comment obviously stands and falls with the idea of Juvenal actually having served in Britain, and that theory itself has been called into question by a number of historians due to the weak supporting evidence. We only have a soldier's tombstone that was found in Juvenal's alleged hometown and has been interpreted by some as the man's grave himself. But regardless of this theory's reliability, it adds another piece to the puzzle that we can't ignore, as it may very well be another indicator that at least some sort of expedition into Ireland occurred in the 1st century AD. And last but not least, we have the promised archaeological evidence. There are a number of smaller finds in mainland Ireland, as well as on some of its coastal islands, that with some certainty point towards a healthy trade relationship between Roman Britain and its direct neighbor. Some items found at a burial site potentially point at Roman-influenced Celtic warriors who may have either served under the Empire or simply fled Agricola's campaigns in Britain or Wales in particular. But overall, evidence of and for a military nature remain scarce if not invisible. That is, with one notable exception: a coastal formation north of today's Dublin going by the name of Drumanagh. And I do apologize if I've horrendously butchered the pronunciation here. Unfortunately, this very area has yet to be excavated, but surface surveys have already contributed heavily to the historical debate. It becomes apparent from simply looking at the coastline that Drumanagh makes for a very good natural fortification, and the fact that it's surrounded by relatively steep cliffs only supports this further. Beaches also flank both sides and in theory allow for an excellent landing point for ships of any kind. Most critically, though, is what aerial photography is quick to reveal. Drumanagh was heavily fortified with 3 steep ditches and presumably a wall protecting its bottleneck connection to the mainland. Even walking the grounds today still allows getting an idea of the impressive fortifications that once stood there. All the wooden structures have obviously long disappeared, but the landscape undoubtedly reveals that the area was once well guarded. Which leaves us with one problem. Without being able to date the structures on Drumanagh, this could have very well simply been a strong point held by the Irish natives at some random point throughout the centuries. Theories ventured as far as to say it may have been a native trade hub or a tribal capital of sorts, but in either case, historians always assign relevance and importance to the site. Due to the lack of a proper archaeological excavation, only very limited evidence helps us with this dilemma. Some Roman findings, primarily coins, allegedly have been made and allow us to date the structure to the 1st century AD and point at a Roman presence. This would, in theory, be a perfect match for the time we are looking at here and Agricola's interest in Ireland. However, most of these findings aren't currently available to the public due to legal quarrels and have surfaced second-hand through art dealers, and as such cannot with final certainty be assigned to Drumanagh. The coins and seeming similarities between the local fortifications and Roman defensive architecture have led some historians to argue that there appears to be a connection between Roman Britain and Drumanagh, though. If we take their logic for face value, Drumanagh may very well be the landing site chosen by a Roman expedition into Ireland. Its defensible geography, the general proximity to Roman ports and islands in Britain, as well as the landing points with the beaches to the left and right, certainly would have been appealing to Agricola or any Roman general for that matter. A fortification of that size and location may already have been enough to secure local interests in the area by controlling trade and preventing large-scale raiding of British coastal settlements, so maybe Agricola did venture into Ireland after all and secured a foothold at least for some time. Chances are this would have only been an expeditionary incursion to scout the lay of the land and build a foundation for future large-scale invasion plans, maybe even only a limited effort to reinstate a local ruler more trustworthy to and dependent on Rome. The lack of convincing archaeological evidence will, however, always cast a shadow of doubt over this theory. One would also have to face the question why and when the fortification was abandoned. A lasting military presence doesn't seem to have occurred, as we can safely assume this would have left more traces in the archaeological landscape of Ireland. Which leads us to our conclusion. Looking at all the available evidence, we are unfortunately being left guessing at what could have happened in Ireland during Agricola's time. Our source material does, however, support the idea and possibility that a Roman military incursion into Ireland may have occurred during the 1st century AD. It also wouldn't be without precedent that a Roman military action left very little archaeological traces and is forgotten about over the following centuries. Caesar's initial expedition into Britain would be a perfect case example here. Without his own written accounts, it stands to argue that modern historians would have never known about this short-term military adventure in Britain, long before the real conquest of the island began 97 years later under Emperor Claudius. So how can we say with certainty that something similar didn't occur in Ireland? The answer is quite simple. We cannot. Like Caesar, Agricola may have very well invested some time and resources in moving troops to Ireland. Maybe it was just a reconnaissance mission that quite simply revealed a full invasion wouldn't be feasible nor deliver the expected returns. Or Agricola did truly partner with an exiled Irish prince in an effort to install local rulers more favorable to Rome. After all, Caesar ended up doing the very same in Britain just before returning his forces to France in 53 BC. But there are other interpretations, of course. It is quite possible that Drumanagh was simply a substantial native trading hub, and Agricola only ever toyed with the idea of expanding Roman's reach into Ireland, but never actually acted upon it. Tacitus and all our other available sources leave this room for interpretation, and so, as it stands right now, we unfortunately may simply never know. And just like that, we have stumbled across the true beauty of historical research. It's a living debate fueled by evidence, but ultimately driven by opinions, theories, and ideas. Try all we might, some questions will never be answered with the level of certainty we would love to see. With that, I'll leave it for today. Now, please let me know if you'd like to see more videos of that kind in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the reference material in the description as well.